Right, it is 6 p.m. and we will call this work session to order. We have one item on our agenda tonight, and that is review of a draft complete streets policy for the city of Mission with Taylor Cunningham and Brian Scott.
Good evening, council. It's good to see you all again. I'm going to set this behind me.
You can hear.
Oh. Wow. Okay, amazing. Good to see you all again here tonight to talk about complete streets. This will really be a lot of discussion of going through the actual meat of the policy, but I wanted to start off with kind of a review of how we got here, and what we've been working on the last several months for the benefit of our new council member and anyone who also might be following along at home. You can go to the next slide. So aside from Councilman Camosa, I'm sure you all remember me coming before you almost a year ago now and giving an introduction to Complete Streets presentation. We'll cover a little bit more of that very briefly in a second. But at that September 2025 meeting, you all kind of gave staff the green light to go ahead and start drafting this policy for the city of Mission. So we put together an internal work group that consisted of staff representatives from from administration, public works, and community development. So we got to work. And as you all know, we had a very busy winter and spring in community development, especially continuing to be a busy summer, but we pulled it together for tonight. So we got a little delayed, but we were able to complete our first draft very early this month with minor touches. And we're ready to present that to you all tonight. Next slide. So quick review for anyone who hasn't heard of Complete Streets or needs a refresher. When we talk about Complete Streets, we're talking about an approach to planning, designing, and building streets that enable safe access for all users, including pedestrians, bicyclists, motorists, and transit riders of all ages and abilities. So when we say complete streets, we're not talking about a finished product of what a street looks like. We're talking about a process that we use to actually design our streets and the principles that we use to inform that process. Next slide, please. So this is a graphic from the National Complete Streets Coalition. It talks a little bit more about the benefit of complete streets in our communities. It breaks it up into these areas, but again, I won't go over this ad nauseum, but how it benefits our economy by having more people on foot and on bike, how it benefits our environment by reducing our dependency on single occupancy vehicles and reducing emissions, how it improves safety by slowing streets down and making more safer designs for all users, and how it impacts our health, again, by reducing those emissions, but also by encouraging more physical activity in our communities. Next slide. So this is all great information, but there's a reason why we're doing this now and at this time. Oh, okay. So we've undertaken a lot of public engagement efforts in the last few years, from our comprehensive plan, various transportation studies, direction finder surveys, and we consistently get a lot of feedback about the need for increased bicycle and pedestrian transportation options in Mission, wanting that more in our community. And the adoption of a complete streets policy was mentioned a few times in our comprehensive plan as well as a strategy to achieve some of those goals for community vibrancy. And so based on that community input, the recommendations of the plan, and then staff and council interest, we've responded by drafting that policy for you all tonight. So didn't just come out of nowhere. We've kind of been building to this point. Simply put, a complete streets ordinance actually codifies our community's commitment to designing streets that are for everyone. So it's not just in word, but also in deed and in process and in policy. Next slide. So we reviewed this back in September too, and I think it's a really important concept to grasp what it takes to get to the outcome that we want, which obviously is a multimodal transportation system that really works for all of our residents. And it starts with the vision. Maybe one of you all have been to Chicago or Boulder or Portland or Minneapolis and been like, man, I wish we had these streets in Mission, or Kansas City generally. And you take that vision and you learn how to craft it into a policy that informs and changes the processes by which you actually design and build these streets. And so once you've changed the policy, once your processes reflect that policy, then you can start to get to the outcomes that you want. Maybe that's a small complete streets improvement on a street, like a raised crosswalk or a new sidewalk. Maybe it's a total street redesign, but it becomes baked into the process of how we do business. Next slide, please. So want to pause here, see if there are any questions before we really start diving into the meat of the policy. That will be a lot of us reading through and getting comments and guidance for what needs changed, but I want to pause and just see if there are any questions or comments so far.
Any questions to start off for Taylor? Yeah, Debbie?
How does this work in coordination with the current process we're undergoing between Lamar and Metcalf on Johnson Drive?
It's not currently working on that because it's not adopted. And I mean, you all know this too. When you plan and design the streets and when they actually get built is often years in between. So I wasn't here when that was designed. So I don't know who was kind of leading that project, but it doesn't apply now just because we've already adopted a design for that roadway.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Any other questions before we go on?
This would be for future projects, essentially. Okay.
Right, great.
So this policy is divided into 10 different sections, and those sections are based on guidance from the National Complete Streets Coalition, the 10 essential elements of a complete streets policy, and we actually went through those in the September presentation. The first section is vision and intent, and it's really like an introduction to the policy. It tells us why we want it. It directs staff towards this goal. It sets some expectations and communicates the benefits. So I'm just going to go through that section and then we can stop and talk about it. And we'll just kind of do that through each of the sections and that's it. So the City of Mission's Complete Streets Policy establishes a framework for creating safe, accessible, connected, and equitable multimodal transportation network. This policy directs the design and implementation of transportation and mobility projects with the goal of improving access for all users of all ages. It emphasizes modes that have historically received less priority in transportation planning, such as walking, rolling, bicycling, and transit. Complete streets elements may include, but are not limited to, and then I'll just an overview, intersection safety improvements, traffic calming measures, pedestrian safety improvements, traffic safety improvements, and bike safety improvements. A connected multimodal network improves route directness, reduces barriers, and supports efficient navigation throughout Mission. A complete streets approach advances the city's goals for public safety and equitable access, while also delivering community benefits, including improved public health and air quality, expanded opportunities for outdoor recreation, and reduced long-term maintenance costs. So now I'll pause and kind of any input or questions or.
Taylor, I had one comment, and this ties into our communities for all ages work
Mhm.
before, but I know the statement references equity concerns. So I was wondering in the second sentence where we talk about the goal of improving access for all
Yeah.
all users of all ages, if we should add all ages and abilities.
All ages and abilities, sure.
Because I think we talked about that kind of in our first
Yep.
work session. And so just bringing that into the statement.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other comments and questions on vision and intent? Yeah, Debbie?
Wheelchair access, those kind of things, or what?
Yeah, so you can kind of see some of the examples in that bulleted list, and we pulled that directly from the Safe Streets for All toolkit so that those documents are speaking to each other. But it really depends on the roadway. For one, this might be, a development project comes in, we're going to make them connect the sidewalks like we did with Mission Vale. The second phase are going to be connecting to the sidewalk at the end of their block. This might be, we have a cars project that's going to be planned in 6 years and we're doing a full redesign of the street. So it's really can be scaled to a lot of different improvements. Mm-hmm.
Mayor,
Oh, yeah.
Ben?
Yeah, you just sort of made me think of something when you said talking about like development projects and
Mhm.
then connect the streets, and we'll get to the
Yeah.
sections later, but like the full commitment section, we're just saying this applies to transportation projects, so it might be, I think, beneficial to clarify how this is going to relate to development projects in that kind of commitment language later. I don't know if we've even decided how that relationship should look, but it just made me think ahead to that section when you said
Yeah.
development.
Okay, thank you. And that might be, more conversation. And some of this we'll talk about later too, is going to be some trial and error of what works for our processes. So thank you.
I think, Taylor, and I'm sorry, but Councilmember Green's question, so like the hawk signal that's going in with this Johnson Drive project currently, that would be something, the type of improvement that's listed here, or at a traffic signal where you're prohibiting right turns on red because you're wanting to make the crossing safer, potentially for pedestrians or cyclists. So some of those kinds of things should be the physical examples of what we might see.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Each one.
Anything else on this section? Okay, next slide. This section is the diverse users section, and it really is about who we're serving in our communities. So it says the City of Mission recognizes that all users of the transportation network deserve safe, accessible facilities. These users include pedestrians, bicyclists, transit riders, motorists, emergency responders, freight and commercial vehicle, and people of all ages and abilities. Additionally, some users face disproportionate transportation burdens and limited access to community resources, particularly low-income individuals, people of color, older adults, children and youth, people with disabilities, and households without a private vehicle. These groups rely more heavily on walking, rolling, cycling, and transit, and face higher safety risks when using these modes. This policy prioritizes these populations in transportation planning and designed to reduce existing inequities and create a safer, more accessible network for all. Anything
Yeah.
on that
And Ben?
section?
We talk about like, like in our trails code, we talk about
Mhm,
micromobility devices and all these things.
mhm.
This is probably going to be another one of those included but not limited to lists, but I think it'd be
Mhm.
worth calling out things like that where
Mhm.
we've tried to specifically treat those things in the, we talk
Micromobility.
about trails, micromobility, yeah, I
Yep.
think is the term we landed on for all the things that aren't bikes but move
Yep.
to like a bike. The other ones that I'm hoping to see that we don't speak to a lot, are like strollers and carts and
Yeah.
grocery carts,
Mhm.
these kinds of things. Because that's honestly, that's kind of the population I hear from the most when there's a sidewalk torn up.
Yeah,
I got to push my stroller in the street or my grocery cart or whatever.
that's true. And I think that the micromobility makes sense. I wonder if people of all ages and abilities speaks to that, but we can definitely
Yeah.
call it out specifically. There's always a tension in these policies of not trying to make the exhaustive list because you'll fail, but also wanting to include, especially things that are so prevalent in our communities.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you.
Other comments or questions on this section? Looks good.
Okay. Next, we have the full commitment section, and this talks about the application of this policy to all projects and all phases. So I'll read from that now. This policy applies to all phases of transportation projects within the public right-of-way, whether publicly or privately funded. This includes new construction and reconstruction, retrofits and rehabilitation, maintenance operations such as repaving, resurfacing, and restriping, and private development projects that require city approval. During any construction, routine maintenance, or emergency repair work that encroaches on the right-of-way, appropriate accommodation must be provided to maintain safe movement for all road users, including pedestrians and cyclists. Private streets, driveways, and parking lots should also adhere to this policy. Questions or comments?
Yeah, I think just be interesting to see how we would think about enforcing this for private developments and like utility contractors and all the different types
Yes.
of people that might fall under this that aren't going to read this policy unless
Yep.
they're sort of told about it. So.
Brent and I especially have talked about that. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Now we have the clear exceptions section, and this lays out, what do we do when we have a project where we don't think we can apply the complete streets principles? So a project may only be excluded from complete streets requirements if one, accommodation is unnecessary on corridors where specific users are prohibited, like interstate freeways. We're not going to put a bike lane on that. The cost of accommodation is documented as excessively disproportionate to the current or future need. 3, there is a documented absence of current and future use based on review of technical documents and plans adopted by the City of Mission, such as the Mission Connections Plan, which is our bicycle and pedestrian plan, the Pavement Condition Index, and the Safe Streets for All Action Plan. Exceptions to the Complete Streets policy will be reviewed and documented by the city administrator or their designee and approved by the city council. The city administrator or their designee will add requested exceptions to the city council meeting agenda for discussion in an open forum. Documentation of the proposed exception will be published in the city council meeting minutes and accessible to the public via the city website.
Yeah, Josepha?
Are these meant to function individually or collectively? Like, does it have to satisfy all three of them?
Individually. Mm-hmm.
We might want to make that language clearer.
Okay.
Yeah, I heard a couple other things I thought about on this list. There's the excessively disproportionate cost piece. Which
Yeah.
I'm curious if the excessively disproportionate is the language typically used.
Yeah.
You know, because I think reasonable minds could differ as to what that means, and maybe that gives us some wiggle room. But then I also wondered, there's nothing on this list about like technical infeasibility.
Such as.
Like, I don't even know what a good example would be, like where we don't, I guess, because you could theoretically always acquire right away, you know, like where we don't have right away.
Where
or
there's
it's a
physical.
narrow street. And so
geographic
if you add a
constraints.
sidewalk and a bike lane, then you won't have enough
Mhm.
like lane left for vehicle traffic. I was just thinking about those types
Yeah.
of things. And then we don't have anything in here about kind of competing demonstrated priorities. So like what I'm thinking about here is the tension that we've talked about before between sidewalks and street trees.
Totally.
So like what happens if you run up against another, you know,
Mhm.
sustainability concern or something else
Yes.
that's also reflected in our comp plan?
Yep.
How does that tension get worked out? So maybe adding
Yeah.
some language about that would be good.
Well, respectfully, you all work it out kind of, because we do have competing priorities. I mean, especially when we talk about financial. And so, you know,
But
the
it
job of the policy isn't
Yeah.
necessarily to give you the number one most optimized answer. It's to kind of
Sure.
present you all with options,
Yeah.
about what it means to carry it out.
But this is, it's currently written, is
Mhm.
presented as an exhaustive list. So it's not an including but limited to, it's a project may only be excluded if it's one of these things on
Yeah.
the list. So that's where I was thinking that we might want to put a couple of these other things on.
like
determination
the
is
city,
made.
yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah, if that makes, sorry, probably not fully articulated well.
No,
Did I say it?
no, it's,
Yeah.
I get it.
Did I see him from Brian? And
You did, but my comment was also around the disproportionately excessive.
oh, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, vagueness. So
And again, putting a number on that is difficult, especially
Yeah.
as construction costs are so variable right now. And I don't envy you all the position of making some of these decisions, but yeah, having those clear exceptions. Again, there's a dance of wanting them to be tight so that you're not seeing an exception with every transportation
Sure.
product we bring. But also actually accommodating the things that might occur. So.
Sam, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just asking, like, in the actual like practical sense of
Mhm.
granting an exception, is it
Mhm.
much like we would approve like a deviation?
Yep.
Code is that kind of
Mhm. Yeah, so and again, it's hard because I think it will take us a few tries to work out the right process. But when I've spoken with Brent and Stephanie, we've talked about this kind of coming to you during the design phase of a project. that we might have, the full complete streets design and it costs $100 and the other design that costs $70,
I like this street project already.
Yeah, same. We can do a lot with paint. We could get there, but so we would bring those options to you to discuss, weigh priorities, and kind of like you alluded to, Mayor, it sometimes the priorities are competing, and it's not because they're on different sides of some ideological spectrum. It's just you can't do both at the same time. I think we see that a lot in sustainability and housing affordability too. So there are trade-offs that you kind of have to just weigh project by project.
Yeah, and again, I am no lawyer, certainly, but I mean, could you almost put in like some language about some sort of discretion element of city council? Because isn't
Yeah.
that what accepting deviations is? It's all at the
Yeah.
discretion of the city
Mhm.
council.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting to, because this is, like I said, presented as a kind of an exclusive list, it says may only be excluded if.
Yeah.
So, if it's catch-all about,
Yeah.
analysis of competing priorities or something that gives kind of
Yeah.
that.
The intent is to, again, not
Tighten
have
it.
a lot of
Yeah,
exceptions,
yep,
but
yep.
we don't want to paint ourselves into a corner either.
Right.
So yeah, we can work out some more language on that.
Anything else on this point?
Great.
Let me ask a question though on the excessively disproportionate. Would you prefer the latitude to just make disproportionate on a case by case basis? Do you want the word excessively out? Do you want to try to establish some specific percentage or metric? What?
I was trying to decide if I knew what excessively disproportionate meant, but I hadn't gotten to whether or not I thought I knew what it meant yet. So I was thinking about that one. Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, I think this is, I've been trying to marinate on this and figure out what I think about this, but I think it's essentially unmeasurable the way it's written, right? And you're pointing to the exact thing. It's disproportionate by whose yardstick and by what metrics. And in some ways, we have a road network that functions for cars that has the benefit of it already exists. The right of way is already there. The network already exists.
Yep.
So the cost proportionate to the need, I mean, people use it because the network exists. So the
Mhm.
current need is easy to justify. But some of the things we're talking about with bike and pedestrian networks are more aspirational and have to lean on that future need. And then how do we price that when we've never really done these kinds of projects? So I think, and this is going to get to my later point, but we can, since we're already talking about it, the one big thing I'd like to see is how do we actually evaluate a project and decide if it's compliant or not, or if we've just been able to tell ourselves, well, we've considered the process, check, like good enough, it's too costly. And what are those metrics going to look like? And how do we decide, we're going to have to set those and I think chew on those for a while to figure out what the right level is.
Yeah.
But,
I think it's also dependent upon scale and why I would hesitate to put a specific number or something because, it might be inordinately expensive, but it's connecting a school to a grocery store. I'm using theoreticals. It might be really expensive and blow the project budget, but this bike lane is like a key corridor in our connections plan. So it's so hard to write a policy that really speaks to everything, but yeah, and I can talk about the metrics later as well, Ben.
Mm.
Councilman Chosky.
Yeah,
excuse me.
Wanda?
I guess my comment is that if we changed the wording to be from may only be excluded to some examples might be, that leaves that open. And then I think the cost of accommodation as excessively disproportionate, maybe if we put another sentence in is evaluated by such and such or something. So that you can keep that, letting them know that you're aware of that, but yet we know who's going to be determining what that is.
Well, and ultimately the recommendation will come from the city administrator, from this internal group that we've been working with, much like a planning commission recommendation would come of, this is your choice, but based on our professional review, this is what we think is the best. And so that would be kind of the expertise we're speaking to. And Um, I, I'm hesitant to make it too open. I totally am willing to put more things in, and I think that makes sense, but I also don't want to see us open the door for
Yeah.
constant exceptions. So it's a dance.
Laura, did you have something you wanted to add? I thought I saw your hand go up. No?
Does my brain ever shut off? No. No, I mean, I think that I hear what you're saying in terms of only be excluded, but I do think that there's an opportunity to maybe create an additional
Mhm.
piece there, because I think the direction that we've heard from
Yeah.
you all is we want a pretty tight
Yeah, I
policy,
agree.
Mhm.
right? That's going to keep us focused on these goals and objectives. And so I think there's some ways to do that, to address some of the things that
Yeah.
I'm hearing here without just
Yeah.
completely taking the guardrails off of
Yeah.
that and making it feel like
Yeah. And that's why I was thinking
Any-
like counterweight of a different competing priority that's
Right.
also set forth in our planning documents or, something like that. 'Cause
Right,
Street,
right.
street trees was the first thing that kind
Yeah,
of jumped
no,
to my
I-
mind of
you're
like
following.
yeah.
not falling into any of these things, but also being
Mhm.
something that people, care about preserving.
Yeah,
kind
absolutely.
of.
Yeah, but I think we absolutely hear, I think we hear the push and pull of what you're struggling with in terms of language and.
Yeah.
Yeah, Josepha?
I want to cycle us back to excessively disproportionate really fast. I am fine with that language entirely because it is frequently the case, especially since equity is part of this policy. It's
Mhm.
frequently the case that when we are looking at equitable solutions for things, any amount of money is fine.
Yes.
Like that's disproportionate
Yes.
to the rest of it. And so like sometimes that kind of accommodation costs more than any developer is wanting to pay.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's more than we want to pay. And so I like the excessive part of it.
Yeah.
We can just be like, yep, it's a bit more, but that part is because it has to be
Yep.
because we have, free roaming human bodies on two wheels.
Yes.
So we have to be
Yes.
more careful with them.
Yep. And like Councilman Chosi said, some of these things will be expensive because we have a built out network already that was exclusively designed for cars. So a lot of. push
And
pull on this.
the need won't compound until the network is.
Correct.
Yeah, Cheryl?
One of the comments I was going to make, we can't predict what the future is going to be. and
Right.
So it's going to be hard, but could we collect examples
Mhm.
that other cities that are, employing these policies are using? So it kind of becomes illustrative of what we should take into consideration.
Right. So like, do you mean for like scoring rubrics? And yes, I have those.
Okay.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Great. Next thing?
Okay, I think we're on next jurisdiction. Yes. So jurisdiction section basically talks about who's using this policy and how. The city will establish and maintain an internal complete streets committee composed of representatives from relevant city departments. The committee will meet regularly to review transportation projects, evaluate them for consistency with this policy and other adopted city plans, identify opportunities to improve multimodal access and safety, and develop recommendations for implementation. Recommendations from the committee will be presented to the city council by the city administrator or their designee to inform project prioritization and decision-making. City staff will coordinate with regional partners, including the Mid-America Regional Council, the Kansas Department of Transportation, Johnson County, utility providers, emergency services, and neighboring jurisdictions as needed to promote connectivity, consistency, and coordination across jurisdictional boundaries. To support effective implementation of this policy, the city will encourage training and professional development opportunities for staff and decision makers related to complete streets principles, best practices, and emerging design guidance as resources allow.
Questions or comments on this section? Yeah, Wanda?
I just think that, I'm a little, it seems to me like I need a little more direction, like relevant, what would be, does that change relevant, who the relevant departments are?
It could. Typically, it would be at the core of public works, community development, and probably administration. But if it was something that connected to a trail or a park, we might want to bring in the parks department. If there was a public safety issue we were addressing, we might want to bring in the police. So it could change, but it would probably stick to those three departments mostly.
Okay, and then meet regularly. Could you at least put a uh, not more, not less than so many times a year so that there's a standard? I mean, how do you know what regularly is and who determines that?
Yeah, so we would meet, I mean, ahead of any transportation designs that were presented to you at council. So it would be on an as needed basis as those designs come in front of you all, which is why it's as needed versus a regular meeting.
It does say regularly,
It-
not as needed.
Yes, it does.
Right.
Yeah,
But that's why we didn't put in monthly, weekly. Would you all prefer as needed?
Well, I guess I had one question on, would they be proactively thinking of things that could be added in the future?
Yes.
Or would it be more as needed as we're working on otherwise planned street projects? Because I think that makes a
So
difference to me.
it will be both because we already meet monthly for our CIP committee. And this committee would largely be overlapped with
Okay.
CIP. That's kind of probably the
Got it.
channel that would go into that. And so, we haven't adopted this policy, but all of our staff, do generally think about these things
Yeah.
because we've done so much planning. So
I mean, I don't have a problem with regularly then if it
Mhm.
is, if we're expecting it to be part of kind of our already
mhm.
working group.
Yeah, I mean, we do have, I was going to mention, we do have a monthly CIP committee and that's newer. But, and that does include Parks and Recreation and, public safety, as well as, sort of kind of a communications aspect to that. And so I think that is one place where that would certainly happen. We have the 5-year
Sure.
capital improvement program, so we're always looking ahead. Plus, you have a development review committee that
Mhm.
meets, you're scheduled to meet
Weekly.
weekly. Sometimes that may get pushed depending on whether there's a pending development
Mhm.
project. But we also in the capital improvement or the CIP committee, we're also talking about development projects in the community as well as the city's infrastructure projects. So we've already sort of started to build that foundation and framework where we're connecting those pieces together and we're thinking about those implications as well.
Mhm.
Okay. Ben, did I see your hand then, Debbie?
Yeah, just thinking about this. So we've said earlier that, we can only have exclusions when certain requirements, which sort of implies like projects will have to go through this process and meet these criteria to proceed. We haven't really said, when or how that mechanism works. I'm interested maybe in how are we thinking about how this dovetails with, are these going to be things that we issue with like RFPs for design projects, or is this going to have to be a hard line before we're allowed something to go to bid?
Mhm.
What are those controls going to look like? If it's going to get an exception, do you have to have the resolution from the dais before you can send it to bid? That kind of thing. I'd like to see just maybe clarity around that. And just partly that's just make sure we get in early enough in design that we're not having to backtrack and spend more money to redesign.
That in the implementation section though?
Yeah, there is a design section.
Yeah.
Address that because our
Yeah.
thought was, and we talked pretty extensively about that, what's the right touch point? Because what we've heard on some of the projects that have come forward in the last, 12 to 18 months or longer, is we've asked some of those questions after we're at the
Yeah.
bid stage or we're ready to go to bid. And so we wanted to make sure that we built a timeline and a process that it's design, pre-design.
Yeah.
And I do want to note that both of representatives from our on-call engineering firms are sitting in the back hearing some of this conversation. I know that's something that's been important to you all. But that's the point at which, we need to start thinking about those things and
Yeah.
bringing them to you so that that's an efficient way. We need to know before we get too far into design, what direction you're headed so that we aren't always designing 2 separate or 3 alternatives on every project, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want us to be up here voting on particular designs, but I do want to see that we get in front of the design appropriately, as we say, and that whoever's doing the design knows that, it's either going to be determined that it complies with the policy or come before the council before it can go to bid for an exception. So might as well, as you say, get it done earlier than later.
Yes, and that's the intent. And, we talked with our public works staff about a lot of this will also be baked into the kind of planning of capital improvement and cars projects from the outset. So the disadvantage is you can't apply it to Johnson Drive right now, but the advantage is that it's baked into our future thinking.
Yeah, Debbie?
I have two questions. Number one, is there any grant money available for projects like this that adhere to maybe basic principles of safety?
Yes, there especially there's been quite a bit of funding through the Safe Streets for All implementation. I actually believe Burns and McDonald worked on a funding application for that for us to implement a lot of our SS4A projects, which are also complete streets projects. So there is funding that becomes available. You can also apply for, raise grants and build grants and stuff for these projects, CMAC and SCP funding through MARC. So there's definitely money available for transportation projects. And a lot of them, especially when you go for federal funding through MARC has a lot of this sort of criteria as well. Projects with complete streets elements tend to score much better. I scored those projects for 2.5 years at MARC, so I remember.
Yeah, Kansas still has a lot of the transportation alternatives grants and things that
Yep.
at the whatever the public thing at the Great Wolf Lodge was, they're just basically begging people to come apply for this money.
Yeah.
So yeah, there you go. That's the one.
My second comment is, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at the policy, it's pretty well defined and what to do and what not to do, exclusions, inclusions. I don't understand the function of a committee. What will the committee do?
Well, the committee would review the projects. So let's say we're going to redo Martway. The design for Martway comes in and it's out of it's exceptionally disproportionate cost, and Public Works is like, hey, we cannot afford this. The committee reviews that and makes a recommendation to you all of whether you should grant them an exception or not. Yes, we grant an exception from applying, this principle based on the excessively disproportionate cost. Or, there's work going on Metcalf, and they say, hey, we're not going to put a bike lane on Metcalf. We're like, yeah, that makes sense. We're going to recommend you grant exception based on that clause of it's a facility where that mode is not allowed. So the committee reviews those as technical experts and with our consulting engineers and makes recommendations to you all, much like the Planning Commission.
Okay, so this would be on an as-needed basis for the committee. They won't be meeting if there's nothing to.
Right. Correct.
I'm still not real clear on the committee. I mean, I understand.
Let me put it another way, maybe. So in some policies, this committee could be composed of internal and external stakeholders. Correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we talked about learning to walk internally before we think about potentially expanding and involving external stakeholders. I would say the benefit of a committee is the more heads we have thinking about it, the more people that are thinking about and understanding that this is a philosophical shift in some regard to how we have approached the design of transportation projects, the more consistently it just becomes a natural part of our thinking. And you don't want it resting in one department or with one person exclusively, because as there's turnover, whether that's at the staff level or at the council level, we want to make sure that we are building this into our approach to doing business as it relates. And so the more people that can be involved, the more people that can think about, whether that's, because I'm going to look at something differently than Taylor's going to look at something than the chief or, the police department or Brent and Stephanie might look at something. And I think just even, I will tell you, in the development of the policy with a committee, the conversation has been very robust, for lack of a better word. And I think we've ended up with better, but I think it's more just underscoring the importance of how we have that philosophical shift. And the more people that are touching that and thinking about it, the better decision-making and the better options that we can bring forward to you.
Well, you mentioned level of expertise.
Mhm.
So I'm presuming that you're going to put architects and engineers and geologists, people like that on this committee, right?
Probably no architects, but we have our consulting engineers we can reach out to if needed. But you know, I'm a planner. Brian's our community development director. We have public works staff who work at an administrative level and in the field every day. And then we have our own administrators. So but yes, we also have our consulting engineers, surveyors, all of that kind of stuff as well.
I thought we were looking at people in the public venue.
No, this is an internal committee is what Laura said. Yeah.
Start with this.
Mary,
We also have had issues filling committees and boards, so.
Mary, did I see your hand?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, I like the idea of walking before we run, and I do think that someday opening it up to folks like similar to a planning commission, especially because people on the planning, like there are people on the planning commission currently that don't have background in
Yeah, yep.
zoning codes.
Mhm.
And I think there's been, you know, a lot of not disconnect, but just I think the public wants more commentary on streets, and this
Yes.
is a way for them to get involved in
Definitely.
that way. Just like a technical question.
Yeah.
And this is maybe too far down the road, but like, let's say the committee does like deny something. Would it take like a supermajority vote for council to pass it, or it's just like a recommendation? So
Mhm.
it's just, okay,
Yep.
curious. So it works
Yeah.
a little different than planning.
Yeah.
More like any other staff recommendation.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Wanda, did I see your hand too?
Yeah, I really apologize for this, but I'm having a lot of trouble with that. The city will establish relevant city departments, compose that sentence. And I get what you're trying to say, but it seems to me that a little bit more should be added, like as determined by project or something, so we know that there's some thought put into that. That it's a flexible committee and you look at what's needed to be on it, it's not as stable.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, Ben?
I think I care less about the committee and how it's formed and how it works and who's on it and when they meet than clarifying a little bit more, like I said, about how we decide that something is
Yep.
in line with the spirit, or if not the letter of this policy. And just to speak more to that, I'm thinking, you know, not just have we thought about, is this on the bike and pedestrian plan, and is
Mhm.
it going to be affordable for the level of need that we think is coming, but something that we can bring forward from a project that's a little bit less, it lets us rely less on the fact that the committee exists and functioned correctly, and more on, we looked at the plan, it says that this road should have, you know, these features or be this part of this network, and therefore, you know, this is the kind of thing that would comply with that intent of
Yeah.
that plan, and
Yep.
and it's met or not met.
Yeah,
Just
and I-
those- yeah, clear, a little bit more clear, kind of like.
Let me, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but just since
Design
this is
section.
coming up. So there's going to be three pieces to this. The first is the policy that I'm bringing before you all. The second is the formal ordinance that includes the policy. And the third will be like the process manual or SOP for staff. We didn't want to write that and draft that before we got done with this part. We have talked about those exact things of how we would determine things if they came in, but we really have to get past this piece to make sure, okay, we've got the framework right, that now we're going to write the SOP from.
Yeah.
So that's the intent of why some things might feel vague, but we haven't written the standard operating procedure yet.
Yeah, and Ben, I did want to flag for you that the design section, in addition to talking about sort of like national guidelines, does talk about looking to our
Mhm.
planning documents, including the comp plan, the zoning code, the bike ped plan, et cetera.
Yeah,
So-
and Taylor just said, yeah, that's to be fleshed out, but looking to means essentially nothing that I can evaluate from the dais, so.
Well, I think if you too go back to the section that we were just on in terms of clear expectations, if you look at number 3, documented absence. Documented, I think, is the key word there,
Mhm.
right? So it's not, we're going to have to bring you the facts.
Yeah.
Yep.
The key thing for me is what you just said, that the details will be
Yes.
in time.
Yeah, we've already kind of been talking about that. In fact, I started drafting it early on to be a companion, but it was like, man, if there's changes in this, it's kind of cart before the horse. So I recognize that might be a little bit of a vacancy.
Next piece.
All right, design. So this section is, yes, we're on design, right? We just finished
Yep.
the section. Great. Sorry, just making sure. Next we have the design section. It talks about the resources we'll use to inform our policy decisions. So complete streets design principles shall be incorporated into all publicly and privately funded projects as appropriate. All transportation infrastructure and mobility projects requiring funding or approval by the City of Mission, as well as projects funded by the state and or federal government, will adhere to Mission's Complete Streets Ordinance. The Mission Complete Streets Ordinance will focus on developing a connected, integrated network that serves all transportation users. Complete Streets principles will be integrated into new policies, planning, and design of all types of public and private projects, including new construction, reconstruction, rehabilitation, repair, and maintenance of transportation facilities in public right-of-way and private projects. The city will utilize the following guidelines to inform the planning, design, and construction of Mission streets. So one is American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials, AASHTO, National Association of City Transportation Officials, the NACTO design guides, which are very fun to look at if you haven't already. And that was not ironic, it really is. Small Town and Rural Design Guide from the Federal Highway Administration, the MUTCD Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices, which is kind of the traditional document that's used. Americans with Disabilities Act, Standards for Accessible Design, PROAG, the Public Rights of Way, Accessibility Guidelines, Americans with Disability Act, Accessibility Guidelines, and then our own documents and plans, including but not limited to our comp plan, zoning code, the bike ped plan, the Comprehensive Safety Action Plan, which is the SS4A plan, our Rock Creek Trail Corridor Studies, and the Pavement Condition Index. Yes.
So which of these are we not doing now with our streets?
That would be a great question for, not for me, for Public Works and our engineering team. I would assume they consult most of these already. NACTO is a little less commonly used, for traditional street design, but it's becoming more ubiquitous now. And so it's less about what we're not doing and more about listing all of the options we have and things that we can consult.
Other questions on this section? Oh, yeah, Wanda.
Under as appropriate, when would it not be appropriate? On the very first, complete will be incorporated into all publicly and private funded projects as appropriate.
I would think when there's an exception granted, or if there's a, privately funded project, but it doesn't include, like it already has a sidewalk or it doesn't need something, then it wouldn't be appropriate. Is that, okay? Sorry, you look.
Yeah, I think that as appropriate is not necessary in that.
That's just contingent on whatever we find from the clear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. As appropriate should be in there, you're saying?
I mean, I see where she's at. If we make an exception to the policy, then there's an exception to the policy. The as appropriate to move at that point.
But we've already said that, so why
Right.
say it again?
Right. I'm saying I see your point of view.
Thank you.
So is that something you all would like removed?
I don't think it's
No.
necessary.
Yeah.
I think if you want to make it clear, you add the language that says unless an exception is
Yeah. I was gonna say
granted, but you
provides.
don't know if you're going to grant an exception. And maybe it said.
Yeah, because this is about the design principles too, right?
Right.
Not just the final finish.
It's also which of the principles is appropriate to the project.
Correct.
I think it should stay, but
I can at least take a look and see if there's a more clear way. to
yeah,
word
that'd be good.
And I would just say, just as a reminder, the addition of the NACTO standards, that was something you may recall that was added in the comprehensive plan. And there was some discussion, particularly for members of our Sustainability Commission, about being specific about incorporating that as a reference in the comprehensive plan.
Yeah, and I think that's good. That's a good reminder, Laura. I'm sure you already did the work on that, Taylor, but making sure that this list aligns with our other planning documents. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll state it more strongly than Taylor did, that if there's something that's missing from most of our projects to date, I think it is the NACTO, especially the Urban Street Design Guide. That's the big feather in the cap for me on this list.
All right. Next section.
Okay. So next section is land use and context sensitivity, which really kind of discusses how land use and transportation intersect as it relates to complete streets. So reorienting mission toward complete streets principles requires integrating transportation considerations into all land use decisions. Accordingly, all new or updated land use policies, plans, zoning ordinances, and related documents must identify how they support the city's complete streets objectives. The physical, economic, and social setting of mission must be given full consideration when implementing the Complete Streets Ordinance. Community context should be integrated into the decision-making process by giving significant consideration to stakeholder and community values. The goal of Complete Streets implementation is to preserve and enhance mission's unique scenic, aesthetic, historic, and environmental resources, while also improving safety, mobility, and infrastructure conditions for all users of our transportation network. Yeah. Any
Comments or questions on this one? Yeah, Sam?
From a practical standpoint, where did it go? Zoning. It said something about zoning.
Yeah.
Zoning ordinances. How, I guess with the ongoing land use study we're doing.
Oh, the
Zoning
zoning
code
code
update?
update?
Zoning code
Mhm.
update. Thank you.
Yes.
Words, they escape me.
Yes.
How, like, is that already too far along to,
No.
okay, will they kind of merge together and those will be played off each other?
Yeah, it will be reflected in that document, even more so because it was called out in our comp plan that really is the source material for that.
Okay.
But we also communicate with them and they know this is something we're working on. So once it's polished, we will send it to them to make sure those documents are talking to each other.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Question. Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, just, we say, new land use policies and so on should support the complete streets objectives. I think we can also say the reverse complete streets should help us build towards the land use vision as well. Just,
Yeah.
where we have mixed use and there's currently a, empty field, for example. It might help those things gain critical mass as we build this network towards the vision we have for those areas.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Oh, yeah, Debbie?
Just one quick one. Somewhere in here, and I don't know if it's appropriate or applicable,
Mm.
but we share streets with other cities
Yep.
too. So how does that factor into what?
In the jurisdiction section, really it just references coordinating with other cities when those are shared roadways. And because of the, legion of outcomes that can produce, it's pretty vague and not really prescriptive, but yeah, that's kind of tied up in the jurisdictional coordination piece.
All right. Next section.
Okay. Next is performance measurement, which creates a system for evaluating the progress and then reporting that all. The city will collect and publicize data every 2 years to monitor progress. Metrics for evaluating performance will include number of crashes resulting in fatalities and/or serious injuries and their location, linear feet of new sidewalks, bike lanes, and trails, linear feet of repaired or replaced sidewalks, bike lanes, and trails, number of safety projects completed. So these would be some of the improvements that were identified in the SS4A study, stuff like that. And number of complete streets projects implemented within a quarter mile of schools, healthcare services, grocery stores, retail and service stores, banks, parks, or recreational facilities. And then there's a table that just kind of breaks down where those all fit.
Taylor, is that last point
It's okay.
supposed to go to connectivity?
Oh, why we would measure that. Yeah, connectivity, vibrancy, and also, yeah, at those activity centers in town. It also can, we were discussing how we could measure economic benefits, and this felt like a relevant way to do that.
Yeah, I feel like there was something similar in the bike ped plan, but I can't
Yes.
remember exactly, yeah. Yeah, Brian, the men.
Yeah, I think you hit on kind of my largest question here.
Okay.
Seems like a lot of the metrics are focused on what did we build,
Mhm.
what did we fund, and not on how did we make mission better.
Yeah.
Like, what are the actual outcomes from all of that
Mhm.
output? I think the chart you showed at the very beginning of the presentation does a
Mhm.
great job of highlighting, like, this is why you do this.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing that reflected as what we're actually measuring in the metric section. That's what, if we can shift that, pedestrian safety. You already mentioned reducing fatalities, economic activity, resident satisfaction, like anything that speaks to, yes, we built this, but here's the actual outcome and success rate of that.
So sorry, I'm struggling a little bit because resident satisfaction would maybe be taken in a direction finder survey or something, but we're also considering how to collect this data. If that's data we actually have the bandwidth to collect, the tools to collect it. And so a lot of this comes from data we're already getting from like highway patrol, for all of our crash statistics and stuff like that. And then, our own design and construction documents of what gets built. So some of those are a little more nebulous that are harder. I will say that, there's mentioned later about having kind of an open for Complete Streets forum annually, where I can envision some sort of impactful storytelling or discussion of those more like qualitative impacts.
I think qualitative is a great way to do it.
Yeah.
If all we're focusing on is what we built,
Yeah.
don't think that gives us the clear picture of was it
Totally.
truly successful or not.
Right. Because a lot of these things get built, but they still need to be programmed. They need education pieces. I don't know what that means for what's in the scope of this, but I think we could easily add something like relevant qualitative data or something like that,
Yeah.
that, if we're giving you an annual or every other year report that could be included as pieces of that, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking too, maybe Taylor, it's like adding a narrative paragraph to this section that connects the dots a bit on why this list
Okay.
of things. So
Yeah.
like you told me an answer for why we care about whether it's by schools or these other things. So maybe
Yeah.
it's connecting it to, these are to advance the goals of the Complete Streets
Yeah.
program, as well as goals set forth in the comp plan and the Safe Streets for All plan, things like that, kind of
Yeah.
tying it back
That's
to
a
those
great
bigger
thought.
policy documents.
Thank you.
I'm going to throw you a curveball. So let's talk about it because I think it's important here as we think about it. And I think we'll develop better metrics and performance measures as we implement and develop and work with this policy. But what would you measure? If you were selecting what you wanted to measure as an outcome, what would you measure? I know there's some of you that know this, so I think it would be helpful for us
Yeah.
to hear that as we think about refining and developing.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with anything else quantitative to me, right, is there's going to be so many other factors that saying whether it's causation or correlation, right? Like you could say, if you do these things, you should see increased sales tax revenue, right? But then like, what if there's a recession in the middle of like,
Totally.
so that's what I'm trying to get at.
Exactly.
Like, this feels kind of like the right list to me if we can tie it back to our policy goals, I think, but because I think anything else maybe gets.
Well, that's where we got hung up, really. I mean,
Yeah.
kind of we got to the economic development piece.
Yeah.
And like on this slide, it talks about they can provide a 10-to-1 return on investment. And
Right.
it's like, how
Yeah.
do we, how do we really?
Yeah,
do
because
that?
you
So-
can say like fewer empty storefronts, greater sales tax
Right.
revenue, but there's just so many other
Yes,
factors that like
exactly.
putting it on this doesn't seem.
Right.
Yeah.
I think in that case, it's probably
know.
worth like looking at that study. Researchers at the University of Arizona must have figured out
Yeah.
a way to tie that.
Yeah, that's true.
But do we have the means to
To
That I
manage that in-house
analyze
every
that
other
data?
year. Yeah.
I'll tell you, the last month, I don't know anyone in our department who would have the resources or time, but
Yeah, so I mean, I think these things make sense if we just connect the dots a little more on how
Yeah.
they advance or how we see them as measuring and advancing our priorities.
Laura's right, this can be changed.
Yeah.
You know, if we decide next year, oh, we should actually measure this,
Yeah.
that's an easy pivot.
Ben, do you have a comment?
Yeah, so that's essentially the comment that I've been waiting here for is what would I measure? Well, in reaction to some of this, first of all, we don't really ask like the level of service on a road to justify if it's getting a 10-to-1 return. So
Yeah.
that's hard. That's a big thing to measure. Who are we gonna, what are we,
I know.
everybody tell me how many dollars you got from bike riders. I don't know how you get,
Right.
whatever. So that's kind of hard to do, and we'll have to figure that out as we go. That's a longer term thing for me, but I think it is interesting. We talk about level of service for roads. How have we improved and even if we have to figure out what this means, the level of service for other users? In a
Yeah,
lot of cases, it's going to be going from, well, there is no service.
Right,
to now there
right.
is. So that's going to be like
F
good metric
F to
track,
be really
right?
quick.
It's going to be wins like every time on a lot of
And
Yeah.
projects.
If I recall correctly, in the connections plan, there is some exploration of level of service for bikes and ped. If I'm mixing that up with another study I worked on, I apologize, but that is a metric. And of course, with all of those things, I haven't been trained of how to study that necessarily, so I don't know what it would look like
Yeah.
to collect that data and get that, but definitely worth visiting.
Even if we just have to come up with a simple, like,
Yeah,
you would never walk here, no way.
yeah, right.
To, it would be great to walk here or
Yes.
somewhere in between. That's a good starting point.
Well, maybe it's like when we're doing the feet, maybe it's a subset on like, was this, and now I forget what language we used in the bike ped plan, but we had like the key corridors, the
Yeah,
secondary,
yep.
et cetera. So maybe identifying like
And I
which
do,
it fell into.
I do envision,
Yeah.
we haven't fully fleshed out the scoring rubric that we'll show you. But that would be a consideration in the scoring rubric as well.
The final couple of things for just measurements I
Mhm.
think are missing are, on like the bike and ped plan. And you mentioned like Safe Streets for All, the CSAP that has some specific things we can track, but just some like the bike ped plan has specific, these corridors
Yeah, yep,
to look like this ideally. So we can just say what percent of the corridors have we
yeah,
addressed?
Yeah, I couldn't remember what we categorized them as, but maybe marking that because we have the new sidewalks, bike lanes, trails. You have to
Yeah,
be some sort
right.
of overlay on, does that correlate to like our
yep.
priority bike channels or
Mhm.
whatever we called them? Yeah. Cheryl, did I see a hand or no? Any other questions on this piece? Nope. Next one.
All right, so next we have project selection criteria, which talks about the principles we will use to prioritize transportation funding in the community. Mission will establish criteria to encourage funding prioritization for complete streets implementation with at least the following principles in mind. Connectivity, connecting existing infrastructure to existing infrastructure, and creating additional connections to community assets, which are including but not limited to businesses, schools, community gathering places, government facilities, medical facilities, parks, and voting locations. Then second is multimodality, implementing projects that expand infrastructure for modes of transportation other than the car. Third is economic development. Does the proposed project support broader efforts to enhance economic development? And equity. Project will broaden transportation options for residents with limited connectivity to community assets. Yes.
Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, I think honestly, tying some of the metrics from the previous to
Mhm.
this selection criteria,
Okay.
like economic development, proposed project supports,
Yeah.
blah, blah, blah. What are the metrics that would indicate to us that it does in fact support economic development?
Yeah.
Like, I think that would maybe make me feel a little bit better that
Yeah.
we are reporting on something that will lead to a better outcome.
Yeah, and this is the scoring criteria that the committee will use and then present to you. So there will be additional things as well that are outside of sort of the data collection piece. It's hard when there are two sections right in a row, and the things that we're looking at and measuring are different, but yeah, we can do that.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, it maybe feels a little obvious to say it here, but I think it's okay to say safety again here. I think that's
Yeah.
a big one.
Mhm.
Great.
All right. Implementation.
Okay. Final section, implementation, how we're going to integrate this into our work and involve the community. So Mission will integrate complete streets practices into routine operations when feasible, treat every transportation project and program as an opportunity to improve the network for all users, and coordinate with relevant departments, agencies, and jurisdictions to achieve these goals. Mission will update all related procedures, plans, regulations, and processes to align with this ordinance within 5 years of its adoption. Further, Mission will also ensure this ordinance remains aligned with the latest standards established by the National Complete Streets Coalition. Finally, the City of Mission will organize an annual Complete Streets focused community work session to update the community on its progress. This work session will include City of Mission staff, elected and appointed officials, and representatives from outside stakeholder groups to provide community input. Through this Complete Streets policy, the City of Mission affirms its commitment to creating a transportation network that is safe, connected, accessible, and equitable for all users. By integrating Complete Streets principles into planning, design, construction, maintenance, and decision-making, the city will continue to enhance mobility, improve public safety, strengthen community connectivity, and support a high quality of life for current and future residents. This policy serves as a long-term commitment to building a resilient transportation system that reflects Mission's values and meets the evolving needs of the community.
Taylor, it might kind of come about through the work session process, but you talk about ensuring it remains aligned with the latest standards.
Yeah.
Would there be some sort of review cycle for the policy itself, or would that kind of happen with those annual work sessions?
I would think it would happen through the work sessions and through our, metric reporting. But we didn't call that out specifically. So that if that's something that this body would like, we can certainly do that.
That could also be in your SOP,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Ben?
I think one aspect, I like this. I think one aspect that we could touch on here is like this policy is meant to inform like our budgetary and revenue collecting goals as well. Who knows what that's going to look like from year to year? I'm not saying we have to lay down details, but it should probably inform like our street sales tax, park sales tax, and general fund transfers and just the budget in general. So we can say that here, I think.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit about the CIP committee, but I don't think the CIP program is referenced anywhere in here. So I don't know if it makes sense to tie those together in any way, or if that might change. And so we left that out.
I think it's implied just by all city transportation projects, but open to additions for sure. I think it's there though.
Okay. Debbie?
How do we kind of comprehensively look at, okay, if it's 5 years, once it gets adopted, we've got ongoing street projects going on consistently for the next 5-10 years.
Yes.
How are we going to measure a priority for looking at these in concert with the work it hasn't been adopted for the 5-year period when we're currently putting money into streets and intersections and sidewalks right now?
Well, so once this is adopted, basically it will apply to any new project that comes before you. So what's been done is done even up until the day this is adopted. It's not a policy that's, dictating our choices or our work, but once it's adopted, it's kind of from then on out forward. So did that answer your question?
I think it comes into effect even before all of those formal updates to the procedures, plans, regulations, processes get updated, right? Yeah.
Yeah. We're doing our street.
Yeah. Whenever, after we
Yes.
adopt the ordinance.
So I think if you think about what has driven, so let's just look at our street program, for example, from a policy perspective right now. What have we said? We've said we are going to approach let's just take residential street maintenance. We're going to approach residential street maintenance with the policy of worst first. And then we're going to also look at, and this isn't as maybe not everybody was here when we said these things, but worst first. And then we are going to look at spreading those projects as equitably as we can among the wards throughout the city so that work was being done consistently throughout the city. So those are the policy drivers for how we've brought and prioritized and brought streets forward to you all. I see that changing with, even without the complete streets policy, with the Rock Creek Corridor Study, with the bike and pedestrian plan, with the Safe Streets for All.
those are giving us other policy considerations that need to be aligned or prioritized along with pavement condition, ongoing maintenance costs. All of those things are going to float in, but we're going to end up coming back and saying, we're going to have to revamp our whole approach to whatever type of project, that is as it relates to the transportation network. And I don't know what that looks like yet. And that's going to take a lot of work and a lot of thought, but we've got all of these other plans that we've been very intentionally connecting together over the last couple of years. And now we're at that point of actually putting them into something that we can apply, evaluate against, recommend, and fund, develop what, today it's hard to sit here and say, what will it take? Because I don't know exactly what that shift in policy approach looks like, but it's going to take a different funding approach than what we have now. And then along with all of that comes messaging with the community, right? About what's shifting and what's changing and what that might look and feel like. I mean, one question I have, and just sitting here, is, we don't have a separate sidewalk policy. We don't have a separate traffic calming policy. Things that can feed into some of these other decisions outside of every time we're looking at a street design. And so,
Yeah, how do we
reconcile those? Do we want to have those things as well to help support our evaluation of projects as it relates to complete streets?
This may deviate a little bit, but I think it's and pertinent right now with Johnson Drive the way it is. We don't have a mechanism to get a fire truck through that area when the cars are lined up for 2 miles. What's our consideration for what we're doing with emergency vehicles during these times where we're having road repairs?
I don't have an answer to that question other than this policy states that we have to consider it and make a plan for it in the future.
And nice hearing.
Yeah,
Oh, Chief, did you want to speak to that first?
I mean, our police cars are a little bit more nimble than the fire trucks. Fire trucks, typically, if it's an incident, they send 2 trucks they tend to take separate routes. And so that allows, in case one of them encounters an obstacle, it allows them to get to the other apparatus to get there.
And we have a
Sure.
communication process with CFD2, right?
Yes.
As well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All of the road closures and everything that Brent and Stephanie send out also get relayed to CFD2.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
The
Okay.
the only thing I'm looking at, what if it's on Johnson Drive where the issue occurs?
No, I know what you're saying. It's right now,
It's
the
scary.
traffic is at a standstill, and what happens because there's no path for a fire truck to get there?
Yeah.
They will make their own path.
They can do it on LA.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll get there.
No, they will get there.
We will get there.
speaking of, good idea flipping to the flashing yellows, whoever's decided that, since there's no turns allowed anyway. That helped a lot this afternoon.
It did.
I wanted to speak to like sidewalk policy and traffic calming. And I think I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic maybe that this policy helps us avoid having to make a master plan for each of those things in detail, since we can look at a residential street and say, you know, when we say worst first, like now it's more than pavement condition. It's, can you walk down the street safely? Is it a part of our pedestrian network? And so that's when we say now, yeah, we should put a sidewalk in.
Yeah.
Not, we have to commit to installing sidewalks on every lane mile of residential street.
So I think that's an interesting question, right? Because this policy actually doesn't speak to selection of projects in that way, I don't think, which might be something that's missing. So I think that's a good question of, are we going to prioritize complete streets projects or things like that over other projects? So do you deviate from your worst for first only based on pavement condition? Because people also walk and bike on that pavement. Do you deviate because you say, no, we're going to pull, you know, X dollars, you know, for other street type priorities, whether that's Safe Streets for All implementation or building out the bike ped network? And so I'm not sure that this policy directly would solve for that, but I also agree with you that I don't really want like 47 different policies
Yeah,
on.
I'm probably coloring my view of this, but I think it kind of encourages that, and hopefully that's the direction we intend to flesh it out. Because I agree, you might be you might think I'm the person that wants the bike lane on every road, no matter what. But I agree with you. I think for the most part on residential streets, the best thing you can do for my bike is pave the
Yeah.
thing.
Right.
Not hit a pothole. Yeah, that's the
That
thing.
speaks
Yeah.
to the context sensitivity
Yeah.
and the community character. And yeah, I don't think that's something you can even make a policy for.
Right. That's what I mean. Like, I think it's gonna kind of be a
case by
big bucket.
case. It's
Yeah.
dependent upon who's on council,
Yeah.
if the community priorities shift and
what
change.
funding is available.
Yes.
What, yeah.
But I think, and you haven't seen it yet because we're waiting for, we referenced the SS4A implementation funding application that's out there. But that took that study and is seeking close to $1 million to be able to
Yeah.
begin to implement that. And
Yeah.
that's based a lot on many of these principles
Yeah.
that we're
Mhm.
looking to measure. So we haven't had the chance to bring those forward for you to really experience in real time how that impacts decision making
Mhm.
on the selection of project.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, at the end of the day, between what we have in the street program relative to cars projects and just the budget that we have, I mean, we need to think about those kinds of things. But again, we're going to be slowly stepping into that and sort of growing our wings as we go, I think.
Yeah. And these might be things too to keep on our, or to put on our direction finder list. Like, do you support, you
With-
know,
yeah,
spend on
on
these? Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Cheryl, did I see your hand? Oh, it was Ben again. Ben, did I
Oh,
see your hand?
I thought I said everything.
Okay.
The only fleeting thought I had before we got on that topic was just this sort of necessarily doesn't address like the parts of like bike and pedestrian facilities that aren't part of streets.
Mhm.
I don't know what the answer is to that. There's probably a whole separate question there, but you know, there are trails and things that we also want to continue thinking about funding.
Okay.
Okay. So we've worked our way through the policy. I'm sure everyone's wondering about next steps. So once we land on a draft that everyone is comfortable with, so we have some changes and revisions to make, certainly. This will be sent to the National Complete Streets Coalition for scoring against their rubric. That doesn't bind us to anything. It just kind of informs if we're going in the right direction, how that's viewed against the current best practices. In a previous jurisdiction I worked for, we got our score back and it was pretty low. And a lot of the pushback we got internally from specific staff members that I have not experienced here, thankfully. They changed their tune because they saw that like 76 and they were like, I don't want that. Okay, make the language stronger. So it can just kind of inform some of those things. And then we're going to meet with our consulting engineers to receive feedback on that final draft. They're here tonight, so they're kind of hearing all of your concerns and discussion as well. We'd like to present that for public input as well. And then we would create the internal policy, the scoring rubric, and the formal ordinance for adoption.
Great. Any questions on the next steps? Yeah, Debbie?
Do we have any cities currently within this region that are applying this policy?
Yes, many of them. I think there's in the first presentation, Westwood, Roland Park, Overland Park. Most of them have these policies. I can't speak to the quality of those policies necessarily. I will say that we took a lot of time and made a lot of effort to make this a policy that was actually usable, not just sort of like a resolution that gets adopted saying we care about people who walk. But one that actually has a little bit of teeth to it. So it looks different than some of our neighboring policies, I will say that. But yes, most communities in our region do have a complete streets policy.
Ben, did I see your hand?
Yeah, I feel like we had some good input from like the Sustainability Commission when we put the building code stuff in front of them. I'd like to ask that maybe our boards and commissions have the chance to give input on this whenever we feel it's appropriate. I'm quite confident sustainability would have things to suggest and add and just encourage the whole process. I assume.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it could be presented. I don't know what else is on their agendas, but maybe once it's scored or refined,
Yeah.
maybe it could be presented at one of their commission meetings or,
Mhm.
yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Looks great.
Thank
Thank you.
you all very much.
And
Thank you for all your work on this.
Yeah.
I know it's not easy.
You're welcome. Happy to do it. You all know where to find me if you have another thought that comes up, but we'll keep plugging away and then bring back a fresh draft for you all.
Perfect.
Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
much. And